I want to return to Kripke's discussion of Wittgenstein, and in particular today start mapping out what is the solution that he investigates. Now here's a place where it really is important to think of this as the Kripkenstein problem, because it isn't, I think, the solution that Kripke is actually advocating. At a number of points, he makes comments to say, all right, Wittgenstein is adopting a strategy, in his view, that's rather like the strategy of Berkeley, or the strategy of Hume, in saying, here's what people routinely say, that suggests a certain picture, but actually I think that common sense picture is wrong, and properly interpreted, we have to see people as really asserting this. And Kripke makes a number of side comments saying, actually I think this sort of philosophical strategy never works. I think the common sense, naive interpretation of people's ordinary remarks is much more likely to be right. So I don't think the solution being put forward is really Kripke's solution. I think it's Kripke's interpretation of Wittgenstein's solution. Also, we could then just say, well, it's Wittgenstein's solution, except that there's a debate about whether Kripke is interpreting Wittgenstein correctly, and I don't really want to get into that. I've brought the investigations, because at certain points he does make an appeal to what goes on here, and it can matter, but this isn't really about whether he's getting Wittgenstein right or wrong. There's a problem here that's interesting and independent of the question of whether it's exactly what Wittgenstein had in mind. And the solution is interesting, even if Kripke ultimately doesn't advocate this solution. Now, what is the solution, and what is the problem? Well, one way of looking at the problem is to say, yeah, we've had a skeptical challenge. So what is exactly the skeptical puzzle that we're trying to address? Well, in a way, it's that there's no fact that determines, well, in the particular case, whether this sign, the plus sign, means plus or plus, but more abstractly, it seems to be that there's no fact that determines what anything means. And so you might think the conclusion that we would draw from that is that meaning, and correspondingly language, maybe even thought, if indeed the same argument applies to the level of thought, is impossible. So that's the challenge in outline. And we have to think about what to do about that challenge. So one way to look at this is to say, well, right now, when I use that symbol plus, I'm in a certain mental state. Is there something about that mental state that determines what I mean, and in particular, how I ought to go on in the future? How I actually ought to continue to practice? We can look at this as a contrast between past and present, or between present and future. Is there any fact about me that indicates that tomorrow, when I add, I should do this instead of that, in any particular case? And the answer is, well, no, there isn't. So, as we saw last time, there are really two puzzles here. One is the problem that meaning is in a certain sense infinitary. That is to say, there are infinitely many possible cases where we would have to add numbers, or say whether something is or is not green, or whether something is or is not chalk, or whatever. And then there's a problem of normativity, which is to say that there are correctness conditions that go along with language. Arithmetic problems are obvious, right? I can get them right or I can get them wrong. There are standards of correctness for arithmetic. But the same is true with my use of green. I can apply it correctly or incorrectly. I can do the same thing with table, the same thing with all sorts of other terms. And so it's a question of whether I'm getting them right or wrong. It's sort of obvious when you think about small children. They sometimes use language correctly, sometimes use it incorrectly. But also think about learning another language. You take beginning French, let's say, or beginning German, or something like that, and you have to learn what's the correct usage of that particular term, of that particular construction, that particular verb tense, and so on. And so there can be right ways and wrong ways. If it weren't true, then in a certain sense you could say, hey, here at the university, we have a whole new class of French speakers, or German speakers, or Spanish speakers, and they do this. And there's no way of judging that correct or incorrect. But of course there is. And if you've ever traveled in a country where there's another language and you're trying to get by and not doing so well, you understand what I mean. I had people in Costa Rica start laughing at me suddenly when I called the dog pero, instead of perro. Okay, because I basically said, hello, but, instead of hello, dog. That's, well, yeah, embarrassing, but also an examination of the fact that, or an illustration of the fact that we do have correctness conditions associated with language. Now, okay, one way of framing this question then is really in a kind of Kantian style. What, if anything, makes meaning, or for that matter, language in general, possible? What are the conditions for the possibility of language? Now, as soon as you frame a question like that, you realize, well, that's a deep challenge. And there are two ways of thinking about not just this skeptical puzzle, but really any skeptical puzzle. So we can distinguish ways of trying to solve that. One way of looking at this is to think, well, yeah, actually, here's one general form. This is something that Gisela Stryker talks about. She calls it an argument from variability. I think you can make a plausible claim that all skeptical challenges really have something like this form. She says there are basically two premises and a conclusion. The first premise is always one about variation, which is to say that some phenomenon you're dealing with can be interpreted or can be perceived in different ways. And then there's an undecidability premise, which says there's no way to tell which is correct. And the way I've framed it there, this sounds like an epistemic challenge. There is no way to tell which is correct. There's no way to know which is correct. And that is indeed the epistemic way of formulating this, and most skeptical challenges are directed at knowledge. But we can easily turn this into a more metaphysical challenge by saying, it's not just that there's no way to tell in the sense that I can't know which is correct, there's no ground for telling what is correct. Okay, it's really, there's no basis for determining anything. So we could say, look, there's no ground for telling. And then we get this in a more metaphysical form. Well, then the conclusion is meant to be, of course, we cannot know. Or might say, there are no grounds for knowing, well, the truth about that subject matter X. Now, how is Kripke doing this? Well, he's basically saying, look, you can interpret the plus symbol in many ways. Even given all of our past behavior and all of our past thoughts, you could interpret what we've done in a variety of ways. That finite set of cases could be extended in indefinitely many ways into the future. And then there's no way to tell which is correct. Where is the fact that would provide a ground for telling that we mean plus instead of quas? So the conclusion is we can't know what we mean. In fact, there are no grounds for knowing what we mean in using that symbol. And so it looks like meaning is impossible. Now, suppose we try to address a skeptical solution, or address a skeptical problem, and frame a solution to this. How could we go about solving a skeptical problem? Either one in general that has this form, or more specifically this kind of thing. What would it take to answer the skeptic? I mean, let's think about a particular case. The skeptic says, I think maybe right now I'm not awake and speaking to this class. Maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe, in fact, I didn't get much sleep over the weekend. Maybe I'm still at home in bed and I'm feeling guilty that I didn't get up for class, and so I'm just dreaming that I'm talking to you. Or maybe I got here and I fell asleep in my office and I'm dreaming that I'm here speaking to you, but I'm not. Maybe you are, in fact, happily, well, maybe not that happily, asleep in your bed and dreaming that you're in class. You probably had a better dream. But anyway, that's something that, well, how would you respond if the skeptic says, you don't know you're actually awake, you don't know you're here. In fact, you might be dreaming. Maybe this entire life is really just a dream. We can put it in Zhuangzi's terms, right? Once, he says, I dreamt I was a butterfly, fluttering hither and thither, to all extents and purposes a butterfly. Then I awoke myself again. Now, I don't know whether I'm a man who once dreamed he was a butterfly, or whether I'm a butterfly who is now dreaming that I'm a man. So that's the challenge. How would you answer the skeptic? How could you answer the skeptic? Yeah.
Well, you have to refute one of the premises. So in this context, refuting the undecidability premise would be to say that you can tell the difference between a dream and reality.
Ah, good. So we could say, yeah, look, there's no way to tell, there's no ground for telling. No. So we could try to refute that. And that leads to what Kripke refers to as a straight solution to a skeptical problem, which is to say, you provide the missing justification or warrant or whatever it is, the missing, well, here we'll just say ground for telling. Whatever it is. So in this case, for determining what is it to be awake, what is it to be asleep, what are the indicators of that? Yeah.
Have you seen the movie Waking Life?
Yeah.
There's that great scene in there where the guy explains that like you're supposed to use the light switch to tell if you're in a dream or not, because electricity doesn't work in dreams.
All right, so we can determine this right now.
Yeah.
Ta-da! Yeah, that's one way. I mean, the classic Bugs Bunny way is to pinch yourself, right? There are maybe more sophisticated ways of doing this. But yes, you could say, hey, I've got a way of telling. That's how you tell. Okay? And so similarly, you could go over here and you say, wait, you don't know whether plus means, or whether the plus sign means plus or plus. Well, hey, maybe we have ways of telling. For example, this is pretty simple and not gerrymandered. This has this gerrymandered feel. In something like the way that green has a gerrymandered feel, in a way that green and blue don't. So maybe we can give criteria for what it is for a meaning to be gerrymandered or not gerrymandered. Maybe we could say, well, actually, there's got to be a ground, because after all, we mean things. And so we reason to it backwards. That's something like what Kant does in a transcendental argument. And so one way of pursuing, I don't know if it's exactly a straight solution, maybe it's really a separate category of things, a transcendental solution, that would say, well look, obviously we do know things of this kind X, and so one of these must be false, but it looks like there is variation, so there's got to be a ground for telling which is correct. And now our investigation is to determine the grounds for the possibility of language, or the ground for the possibility of meaning. So maybe as a separate thing, maybe as a variant of this, we have a sort of transcendental solution, and we ask the grounds. We try to find, you might say, the ground for telling, but we start from the assumption there must be such a ground. And this is the strategy of Kant, of Heidegger, who is constantly asking that kind of transcendental, or asking the transcendental question, what are the grounds for the possibility of experience? What are the grounds for the possibility of knowledge? What are the grounds for the possibility of causal connection, or experience in time, or this type of thing? Okay, now, is there anything else we can do? Yeah.
I'm not really sure if it would satisfy, but like Russell has the whole logical atomism where he has like certain like kind of like words that are just set, and I guess you could do that with some words for meaning as well.
Ooh, good. So indeed, one way of approaching this, and in fact Wittgenstein thought it was the only alternative to what he lays out in the investigations, is to have a theory of language that pins things to logical atoms. So in short, the theory he gives in the Tractatus. He gives reasons in the investigations for rejecting that, but in the end he says, look, it's really the only alternative. Either you think meaning is not something you can fix in this way, or you think it is something. And in that case, is he giving you there a straight solution? Well, in a way he is. He's saying, here's the missing ground. We have this, the world consists of this structure of facts, and language corresponds to the facts. And so you could say a particular variant of this would be the Tractatus solution. And we're going to talk much more about that in a moment and how it varies from what he's doing here. But I think that's exactly right. You could say, look, here's how we do it. There is this underlying structure that language matches. Now notice, in this case, we are saying there is a way to tell which is correct, because some things match what happens and some don't. Imagine that somebody goes to Las Vegas, and they're skeptical. So they sit there at the blackjack table, and they start losing. And they say, well, you say I lost. How do you know I lost? They say, well, you know, your cards added up to something more than 21. The person says, well, how do you know that? I was using plus instead of plus. And for anything that is over 21, the answer is just 21. Now, you're not going to get far in Vegas, right, with this strategy. But the person might, in that context, respond by saying, wait, no, there are these facts about the cards and what combinations constitute winning and which combinations constitute losing. And whatever you think about the usage of this plus side, the fact is that this combination of cards is counted as a winning combination. This one is a losing combination. Part of what makes that work is that there are only finitely many cards. There are 52 cards in a deck, and you can lay out all the possible combinations of 52 cards in, well, I guess not an infinitely long or an indefinitely large set of hands, but there are only certain, I mean, suppose you just keep drawing twos, then still you're going to be over 21 after 11 times. And so you really do have a finite set of possibilities to consider in that case. Similarly, if I say, aha, I've got a piece of chalk in one hand, which hand is it? Well, pick. Which hand?
Left.
You're right. Very good. Okay. Notice, there was a way of telling. It's not like, oh, there's no way of telling whether he's right. Of course there's a way of telling. There's the chalk, right? So sometimes there really is a way of telling. And what Wittgenstein and the Tractatus is doing is giving us that way, basically saying, here's what the world is. The world consists of facts. And sentences are things that are designed to be pictures of facts. They're supposed to represent them. And that means at the atomic level that they're supposed to be isomorphic, in a sense, to these facts. And so we've got a way of determining whether those sentences are true or false, if the Tractatus story is right. Well, is there anything else we can do here? I mean, we could attack premise one and say, actually, things aren't interpreted in different ways. Now, a lot of times that doesn't make any sense. Here, for example, it seems pretty clear that someone could have that interpretation of plus. But, for example, in moral philosophy, sometimes people do fight about that. They'll say, well, actually, cultures are alleged to vary a great deal in their moral beliefs, but some people say, actually, they don't. They vary about their factual beliefs. And so, in detail, yes, their cultural norms about various things are quite different. But nevertheless, the basic values, they actually agree upon. And so there's no disagreement about basic values. And if that's right, well, that would be a way of denying this variation premise. So we could do that. In this context, it's not going to be very plausible. Are there any other strategies we could use? Yeah.
The conclusion does seem a little strong to say we cannot know X, because it seems like you can know stuff about several different interpretations of X, you just don't know which one's right.
Ah, good. So yes, you might say, wait a minute. This argument is supposed to actually work. There's supposed to be an implication between these premises and that conclusion. But you might think, this is way too strong. That doesn't follow. After all, this is making, as you put it, a very strong claim about our inability to know. What if you say, look, this demand that we have some way of determining which of these possible variations is correct is just too strong? Think about it in connection with various things in the humanities. Imagining that you're interpreting Shakespeare. Is there a way? There are all sorts of variations in your interpretation of Hamlet, let's say. But now, is there a way of telling which is correct? You might think, yeah, there's not really a decision procedure for literary interpretation, so that seems plausible. So there's no way to know whether a given interpretation is correct. That seems too strong, right? Suppose I say, well, here's my interpretation. Hamlet is really standing in for Porky Pig. Okay? And Hamlet, can't decide what to do. He's very indecisive, just like Porky Pig. And so really, this is the Warner Brothers interpretation of Shakespeare. You might think, yeah, that's insane, right? I mean, that can't be right. And you might think, even if I don't have a way of telling you what the correct interpretation of Hamlet is, I'm pretty sure that's a terrible interpretation of Hamlet. Here's another really terrible interpretation. Really, Hamlet is all about the Trinity. And so it's really a theological treatise on the nature of the Trinity. Why do I think that? Well, think about who the main characters are. There's Hamlet, there's Ophelia. Who else?
Gertrude.
Yeah, good. So we might say, oh yeah, there are really three main characters. And then there are these little subsidiary characters, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, etc. But they're really like the angels. And the three main characters are really, and who's Hamlet? Undecided what to do and so on. Well, maybe this is Jesus in the garden. And so I give this theological interpretation of Hamlet. And you say, that's just terrible. Okay, that's just awful. I'm making it up on the spot right now. That's one way of, but come on, the king, that's like God the Father, and Hamlet's like God the Son, and Ophelia is the Holy Spirit. And, I construct this elaborate interpretation, and you might say, no, that's just terrible. That's just terrible. and that's the sort of thing you might think, yeah, look, I might know that certain interpretations, they're just terrible, right? Even if I don't have anything like a decision procedure for determining correctness. So, here would be a way of framing that as a general critique. And I think it is connected to thinking, look, there's something wrong with the argument. It doesn't justify that strong a conclusion. This is what Kripke refers to as a skeptical solution. Now maybe this isn't the only way of taking this complaint about validity, but it is a way of telling. It's basically to concede the case. To say, yeah, you want something here, and I can't give it to you. You say, give me a way of telling which is correct. Give me a ground for determining which is correct. Yeah, I can't do that. So the skeptic says, yeah, so I win. And the response is, no, you don't. Because I don't need most thinking badges. I don't need most thinking justification. Okay? Now I'm appealing to a different sort of literary work. But in this case, you might say, yeah, look, I concede. Right? There are no grounds. But I don't need most thinking grounds. Kripke doesn't put it quite like that. And that's in a way what it is to challenge the validity of the argument, to say, I grant that it can be interpreted in different ways. I grant that I have no procedure for telling, or there's no fact that determines which is correct, etc. But still, I think I can know, even apart from that. And indeed, in literary interpretation, you might think this is very plausible. I can say there's no fact that determines how to correctly interpret Hamlet, but nevertheless, I maintain that I can know that some interpretations are a lot more plausible than others. And that means I don't need the grounds you're demanding from me. And so Kripke is advocating that kind of solution, or at least Kripke's interpretation of Wittgenstein is a Wittgenstein advocating this kind of solution. Okay? Not actually giving you a straight solution by providing the missing ground. That's what the early Wittgenstein does. Not giving you a transcendental solution, saying I'm going to investigate the grounds for the possibility, assuming there are such grounds and that it is possible, and then figuring out what they are. Instead conceding there are no grounds. But still, in this case, meaning is possible. Language is possible, even though no fact determines anything about how I ought to go on. Now, what would that sort of theory of language look like? Well, maybe we can understand it best if we think about the contrast between the old picture in the Tractatus and this new picture he's urging on us. So let's think about this Tractarian picture of language in more detail, and then we'll see exactly what he's rejecting in the later work. So, in the Tractatus, I have a sentence, let's say S, and then tell me about its meaning. What is it doing in the Tractatus? Let's take, actually, an example mentioned by Kripke. The cat is on the mat. That's sort of a classic philosophical example of why it's the first sentence from the McGuffey readers in the 19th century. That's how people started trying to read. The cat is on the mat.
What's the question?
What's the question? Sorry, what's that sentence doing? According to Wittgenstein in the Tractatus. or according to Aquinas, or according to Aristotle, or according to most of the philosophical tradition. Because really, the Tractatus is giving us, in a lot of logical detail, a picture that I think he thinks is there in much of the philosophical tradition, implicitly at least, and sometimes pretty explicitly.
Stating a fact.
And stating a fact, exactly. S, if it's true, is corresponding to some fact, right? And the truth consists in, well, actually there being a fact that it corresponds to, precisely. And so what would that fact look like? Well, the cat. What is the cat going to stand for? Now actually, the cat, the mat, those are definite descriptions. So if we are along with Russell, we realize, oh, it's very complicated. Now we get, there is exactly one cat and there's exactly one mat, such that that cat is on that mat. But forget that. Suppose we don't think about this in Russellian terms and we adopt a more naive theory. Then what is the cat corresponding to?
The mat?
No, it doesn't correspond to the mat. It's sitting on the mat.
What do you mean?
But I mean, the linguistic item, the cat. What is it? The cat, yeah. So here's the cat, right? And, oh, it's a huge cat. That's really horrible. Oh, yeah, let's try that again. That's pretty good. Yeah, for my artwork, that's pretty good. Now, it's on the mat. So, the cat is corresponding to that. The mat is corresponding to that. What's the is on corresponding to? Well, something about the relation between the two of them, right? And so you might say, okay, here we have the cat. Let's say, I don't know, Felix. And here is the mat. Normally we don't give mats names, but let's call it Matthew. And then we can say, all right, Felix is on Matthew. And notice there is a sense in which this is depicting. This is something like a picture of this. There's a way of mapping the items that are referring in the sentence to the things in the fact. Okay? And so we could say that S is true if and only if there is a corresponding fact. That's how Russell puts it at one point. Another way of putting it is that we can map the various parts of S onto a fact in the world, at least if this is an atomic sentence. And then we have the whole Tractarian theory of what to do about molecular sentences. Like, if the cat is on the mat, then the mat is likely to get dirty, and so on and so forth. Now, notice what's happening here. We determine the meaning of S how? What would we associate with the meaning of this sentence, the cat is on the mat?
The meaning of the description.
That's right. It's really a question of, describing the conditions under which it would be true, describing that sort of fact, right? And so we could say, here we can understand the meaning of a sentence S as being given by its truth conditions. Under what circumstance is S true? And we could say, well, this is true if and only if, a certain cat is on a certain mat. And here, notice that way of putting it assumes something like a familiarity theory of these descriptions. If I say the cat is on the mat, I'm assuming you're familiar with the cat I'm talking about and the mat I'm talking about. And so, there we go. Now, Wittgenstein, in his later work, wants to reject this picture. So the skeptical solution involves getting rid of it and replacing it with another understanding of language. So, in the investigations, we get a different sort of theory. In fact, he has a number of examples near the beginning of the investigations where he has uses of language that don't fit this very well. He imagines people at a construction site and a worker simply says slab. Now he thinks, what could that mean? Okay, you're building something, worker says slab. Now notice right away, it's a word, right? It doesn't have the form of an assertion. And so you can't very easily say, oh, here's what assertion is being made. In fact, it might not be an assertion at all. So think about the various ways in which somebody might just use that expression. Might just say slab at a construction site. Let's say they're moving around these slabs of concrete, building something. So I say slab, what could that mean?
You need a slab.
Good, it might mean I need one, right? Got that one in place. Slab, meaning bring me another slab. Now notice that's not an assertion. It's something like a request or a command. It's not something that I can easily express in terms of some corresponding fact. Now in a certain sense there is a corresponding fact, namely somebody brings me a slab. And so it has some connection to something like this, but it's not the kind of connection envisioned here. What else could I mean by saying slab? Yeah?
Like look out for the slab?
Look out for the slab, right. I might see there's a slab being suspended by the crane up there, and I see that it's starting to slide, and the slab is going to fall. And so I'm shouting to the workers up there, slab, right? Indicating, look out for the slab. Or maybe the crane is bringing it over and swinging it by, and a guy is standing in the way, not paying any attention, so I'm shouting a warning. Well, once again, it's hard to assimilate that to this picture. There's no, if I am asserting something, I guess that it's like a slab is coming your way. But it's very hard to see what the corresponding fact looks like. And the point of it is not to state a fact. I mean, it's not as if I said, there is a fact, there is a slab, Joseph, that is headed in your general direction. It's to say, get out of the way. And so there's something going on here that can't really be easily captured by this. What else could slab mean?
You're expressing excitement that you're seeing a slab?
Exactly, right? You might be there, you're new to the construction site, you've never worked on anything so big, you've been maybe building a few brick walls or whatever, and then you're seeing these huge concrete slabs building the highway overpass, and you're slab, right? Dude, this is big! And so it could be the appreciation of a slab, the aesthetic beauty of the slab, the sheer power and weight of the slab. Whatever it is, again, it's pretty hard to assimilate that. What's my assertion, right? Just look at this slab. Yeah, I don't know how to express that here. Is there anything else that I could mean?
You could say it out of fear, as if you're afraid of slabs.
Exactly, I might be afraid of slabs. Maybe I'm excited to be on this big project, but maybe it's terrifying, right? A little brick, I think I can handle this one. Slab? And I'm frightened by these huge slabs. I realize this is a dangerous project, and I don't really know how to do this. Again, pretty hard to assimilate to this. Now, as soon as you let your imagination run wild, you realize, wait a minute, we could go on all day like this, right? Thinking of scenarios where somebody could say slab and it has a different sort of meaning. And many of those meanings have nothing to do with an assertion, or at least aren't primarily about an assertion. So here's what the picture is in the investigations. There are language games. And something like, well, statements, or I should just say expressions, indicate, or are, moves in these games. Now, sometimes those games might be games of assertion, trying to express what's going on, but often they're not. They might be games about indicating when I need a slab, for example. Or they might be warning games. Or they might be games of aesthetic appreciation, positive or negative. Or, et cetera, et cetera. We use language for all sorts of different purposes. So sometimes when I talk about the Tractatus, in fact, I point out some of these things. I just show people slides of other uses of language. I show people on the sidelines and cheerleaders at a football game shouting, Texas, fight! That's not really an assertion. How do you handle that on the Tractatus view? Texas, fight. I don't know. I show the quarterback. Quarterback saying, red 17. What does that correspond to? Right? Where's the corresponding fact? I don't know. Then he says, hike. Again, doesn't seem to fit this picture. I show a picture of a guy just around the corner of my house who somehow tipped his car over on Great Hills Trail. And all of this, he was clearly moving, and all this stuff just spilled out of the back of his Honda, so it's all over the street. And I asked students to imagine what he said when the car came over and he saw all his stuff spread all over the street. I'm pretty sure it cannot be analyzed according to the transcendental language. So there are these different kinds of language games. Now, what does that tell us? Well, what is meaning? Is meaning a question of truth conditions? No, it's a question of assertibility conditions. So the idea is that a linguistic expression is going to be assertable in certain kinds of conditions, in certain kind of contexts, certain kinds of circumstances. And the meaning is something we would capture in terms of the conditions under which you could say it. But those conditions are complicated, and they may have nothing to do with truth exactly. And then the second question that arises, this is really a question of when, under what conditions, can I assert this? Or really, we should say, maybe more broadly, say this, since a lot of these things aren't going to be directly assertions. Like hike, or what the guy said when everything spilled. Oh, darn. Okay, that's not going to be an assertion of this kind. But anyway, when can I say this? When is it appropriate to say this? And then the second question is broader, because after all, that's really something like saying, well, it could constitute this kind of move in that kind of game. And the point of slab is that actually it can constitute all sorts of different moves in all sorts of different games. So one is to say, well, when can I assert this? It's going to be as certain moves in certain games. So we'll have to talk about the moves and the games. And then we've got a second broad sort of question. Kripke expresses it as one, but I think it really divides quickly into two, which is about the utility of that. Okay, what's the role of that move in that game, but also what's the role of that game? So that's really a question about utility. So now I think about hike, for example. When can I say that? When is it appropriate to say hike?
When you're about to start the play.
Yeah, you're about to start the play, right? You're the quarterback, and you want the center to give you the ball. Even within the context of football, there are lots of circumstances in which it is not inappropriate. I mean, in which it is inappropriate, where it wouldn't be the right thing to do. If the quarterback in the middle of the huddle says, hike, that's an inappropriate usage, right? Or if the wide receiver is over there, finally takes his position and just shouts, hike, when the quarterback isn't ready, that's really bad, right? Or the defensive players start shouting, hike, hike. And so, and it's, I mean, it would ordinarily make no sense in a philosophy course, right? I just walk in and I say, okay, hike. What am I expecting you to do? So that's, well, part of it is to say, all right, it's this kind of game and it's this kind of move in that kind of game. Let's think about the expletive case, okay? The guy sees his car turn over, all of the contents goes spewing all over the road, and he utters some expletives. Under what circumstances is it appropriate to utter expletives?
Depends on where you are.
Depends on where you are and depends on the expletive, absolutely right. So that's actually a sort of socially subtle, right? But now notice that from this point of view, that's exactly what you would expect. There are different kinds of language games. And so a certain word is going to be a rather strong expletive in one context and a very mild one in another context. And there are going to be certain circumstances in which it's appropriate to assert this, and others in which it's not. And then what kind of game is being played here by an expletive? What's the game that's being? Is there a game? Again, it sort of depends on the expletive and the context and all sorts of things, because one is just an expression of strong emotion. I don't remember whether I uttered an expletive on the occasion where I was using a pickaxe to try to break up a bit of limestone. It turned out to be a big chunk of limestone. And so when I thought, if I just hit it harder, it would work. So bam! And it just bounced off of that piece of limestone. And the handle of the pickaxe just went right into my kneecap. It was really painful. I think it might have been so painful I didn't actually externally say anything. But internally, I can tell you I was using expletives. What was the role of those, at least internal expressions of the expletive? While externally, I was probably just going, well, you know, it was an expression of pain, right? An expression of emotion. And so there's some kind of game there that's involved, presumably, where, okay, that's its appropriate role in that kind of game. Now, what about the cat is on the mat? Let's come back to something that looks like a straight assertion. Because after all, the Tractarian might say, look, I'm fine with all of this. You're absolutely right that declarative sentences are not all of language. Sometimes we use interrogatives, asking questions. Sometimes we issue commands or requests. Sometimes we express something in the hortative that is kind of dying out in English. But, oh, that I had wings. Oh, that my students understood Russell, etc., etc. Or, you know, sometimes they're expletives, exclamations, and so forth. Yeah, there are all those different uses of language. And usually the advocate of this kind of theory says, yeah, I don't know what to do about those, but they're all parasitic on this. Really, there is some kind of underlying assertion, or we can define their meaning in terms ultimately of the meanings of assertions. Like saying, you know, a hortative, would that such a fact were the case. Question, is such a fact the case? Command, make that fact be the case. Exclamation, here's how I feel about that fact being the case. And so it's not a crazy thing to say that actually the fundamental idea of language is something like expressing a fact, depicting a fact, and then all the others have to do with various kinds of relations to that sort of fact. But suppose we go this way. How would we analyze the cat is on the mat? When can I assert that?
You're just asserting a fact, right?
That's right, I'm just asserting a fact.
Isn't that all there is to it?
That's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, I could say, well, I can assert it when the cat is on the mat. And so it could be that the assertibility conditions look just like truth conditions for this kind of sentence. Is there any other way of seeing it, though? Because after all, I could say, yeah, look, you could see the Tractarian theory is really about the following thing, when the game is that of depicting the world, and the assertibility conditions then are just the truth conditions. You can assert that about the world when there is such a fact in the world. And indeed, I think somebody could, in that way, adopt the investigations theory and say, but look, in a really important subclass, it's just the same thing anyway. And so, if you like, this theory has to be a part of such a theory there. And actually, yes, this theory has to be supplemented by a view of these broader language games of interrogation or exclamation or command and imperatives and so on and so forth. So sure, really there's no incompatibility. And so to get a clash, we would have to have a different way of understanding these assertibility conditions. Now with the cat is on the mat, maybe there's no interesting difference. But where is all this going? Well, here's the key move, to say, let's apply that strategy to meaning talk. In other words, here we're telling you a story about meaning. But suppose we say, suppose I take something like this, or some claim about this, or a much more specific claim, plus, that, for example, the plus sign means plus. And suppose I ask, now what are its assertibility conditions? If I ask about its truth conditions, of course I'm going to look for a fact, and then I won't find one, and I'll be disappointed, and I'll think, oh, the skeptic is right, I don't mean anything by anything. But suppose I'm saying, under what conditions can I assert that the plus sign means plus? Then maybe I've got a different kind of answer that I can appeal to, one that doesn't rely on a fact that determines meaning, and so I can escape. So next time what we'll do is ask about the assertibility conditions for, well, meaning statements, for mathematics, for various other kinds of things, and see why Wittgenstein thinks this opens the door to a different kind of answer. It doesn't prohibit this kind of answer from being given, but it will say maybe there are other options that will solve these problems about meaning and let us escape the skeptical problem.